Well, hello, my dear, and welcome to my humble abode. You've probably figured out by now that you're about to become the bait in a quite deadly trap I'm setting for your lover, the indomitable 007. In fact, let's give your little boyfriend a call right now, shall we? Hello, Mr. Bond. I believe I have something of yours that you value quite high.
No, just shoot the fucking bitch.
What?
Just kill the stupid c***. Stupid fucking shouldn't have let herself get kidnapped. I hate blithering women who think they can do a man's work. Why the hell can't they stay home and mind their pots and pans and stick to their frocks and gossip and leave men's work to the men? Bugger all of them!
Oh my, well, what on earth do you see in him? I think you're rather off better here with us. It was such a clever plan to capture him too. You see, there's a trapdoor under you that leads down to a title sequence. The activation switch is hidden under... Oh! Sorry! Hello my beautiful watchers and welcome to Lost in Adaptation, the YouTube-hosted review show that's all about comparing films to the books they're based on. It's been a good 7 years since I touched upon a James Bond film, but it's finally time to add another to the list. Let's start with a little backstory regarding the author. Ian Fleming was one of the most successful British authors of all time. Born into wealth in 1908, as a young lad he was sent to Eton, Britain's fanciest, highest-class school for aristocrats and other rich buggers, where he scandalized the staff with his use of fashionable hair products and multiple girlfriends. As a way of getting rid of him, he was rushed into early graduation and sent to military college in the hopes that that would straighten the little whippersnapper out. This evidently failed, as less than a year after joining, he had to return home for, STD-related reasons. Of course, the scions of wealthy, well-connected people can only ever fail upwards, even if they evidently don't particularly want to, and his mother pulled some strings to get him a job as a journalist. During the Second World War, Fleming joined Britain's Naval Intelligence Division and was involved in planning a major military operation that was codenamed GoldenEye. In 1952, Fleming drew on his experiences in military spy work to write his first Bond novel, Casino Royale. In fact, a closer inspection of Fleming's life than I have time to elaborate on right now suggests that he based a good deal of Bond's professional adventures on things that he witnessed in real life. Amazingly, candidates for the inspiration of the famous agent include author Roald Dahl, who used his popularity in the United States to spy on them for the British government, and actor Christopher Lee, who was a war hero, hand-to-hand combat specialist, and allegedly a famous assassin of Nazis. Yeah, it turns out that Saruman had nothing on how fucking hard the actor portraying him was. What I'm getting at here is there's high potential for a Shakespeare-in Love style biopic of Fleming's life. Get on that film, people. Anyways, this flagship book was extremely well received, and Fleming went on to write a total of 14 novels and short stories about this MI6 agent, the last of which was published posthumously after his life of heavy smoking and drinking finally caught up with him in 1964. Fun fact, the dude also wrote Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. I guess he wanted to try something way outside of his usual MO. I have to be honest with you now, my beautiful watchers, I do not personally care for the Bond novels. I find them boring, their endings often anticlimactic, and their lead character a disgusting wanker that I really hate being inside the head of, but hey, they've sold over 100 million copies worldwide, so what the fuck do I know, I guess. The first film adaptation of James Bond was made in 1962, starring Sean Connery. However, they chose to begin the franchise with the 6th novel in the series, Dr. No. Over the next 40 years, 20 Bond films would be made with 6 different actors, some adapting the novels in no particular order, and others, especially later films, written as original screenplays. But none of them would take on the title of the first book in the series, except ironically, a non-canonical parody movie made in 1967 starring David Niven. That was until 2006, when a combination of British and American film corporations announced that 007 would be returning to screen in the form of yet another new actor, and he would be starring in Casino Royale. To direct, they brought in Martin Campbell, a solid choice as he had managed to pull the Bond franchise out of a slump once already with 1995's GoldenEye. The screenplay was co-written by Neil Purvis, Robert Wade, and Paul Haggis. Daniel Craig became the seventh man to take on the James Bond mantle, Eva Green was cast to play the love interest, Mads Mikkelsen the villain, and Giancarlo Giannini and Jeffrey Wright played notable supporting roles. Now, the idea of continuity between films that continuously change what decade they're set in and who's playing the lead has always been a bit of a joke, but prior to release it was made pretty clear that this new installment was intended to be even more of a reboot than usual, going back to the start of Bond's career as a 00 agent and taking on a darker, more serious tone than its predecessors. That said, despite this claim of a fresh slate and completely new Bond universe, some things were carried over, like Judi Dench playing M, the head of MI6. They also included multiple tongue-in-cheek nods to tropes established in the classic films.
Vodka martini. Shaken or stirred? Do I look like I give a damn?
I'd like to think that if he hadn't passed away very soon after retiring, they might have also invited Desmond Llewellyn back for a cameo reprisal of the role he played for the better part of 4 decades. So, let's see if at the time of this recording, most recent Bond, James Bond, had a strong start adaptation-wise. Le Chiffre, a criminal entrepreneur with connections to a powerful organization, loses an ungodly amount of money and, fearing retribution from his employers, attempts to recuperate it in a famously high-stakes card game hosted at the Casino Royale in France. Getting wind of this, MI6 sends their most skilled card player, Special Agent 007, to join the game undercover and stop Le Chiffre from winning, thus eliminating a dangerous adversary without having to dirty their hands. A young lady called Vesper Lind is sent with him to handle the colossal buy-in money. Bond gets cleaned out in the early rounds and Vesper won't back releasing more money to him, but fortunately he's bailed out by Felix, an American CIA agent with a shared interest in Le Chiffre's downfall. When Bond starts winning, Le Chiffre tries to have him killed, but the attempt fails and Bond takes home the whole pot. In a rather unsporting move, Le Chiffre kidnaps Vesper to lure Bond into a trap, then ties him to a chair and, gives him some whacks in the old tallywhacker in an attempt to get him to hand over the cash. Bond and his poor abused pork sword managed to resist torture long enough to be saved by an unlikely ally, an assassin sent by Le Chiffre's bosses to execute their wayward agent for his failures. Bond and Vesper bond during his recovery and fall in love. Bond decides to resign from MI6 and run away with her, but Vesper starts acting weird when she notices certain people following her. Bond finds out she was a suborned agent working for the enemy this whole time, and Vesper ends her own life. Heartbroken, Bond decides to throw himself into his work and start tracking down all the people who think they can fuck around with impunity. While they're only mentioned offhand, it's true to the book that you have to have confirmed kills to be a 00 agent. Amusingly, book Bond flippantly implies that being willing to kill is the only requirement to gain the vaunted status. Renee Mathis, Bond's local contact with France's counter-espionage, was in the book with a slightly smaller role. Giancarlo Giannini gave such a good performance they brought the character back in the sequel, only to kill him off, which is a bit of a bummer. Bond, gripped in the emotional turmoil of Vesper's betrayal and death, says the line, "The bitch is dead," in both versions. I usually wouldn't make a big deal out of a single line, but it's the closer of the book. This rebooted 007 sticks a lot closer to the hot, emotional mess Bond was in the books, toning down the suave nonchalance he showed towards danger and women in the classic films, and letting him feel his dang feelings. Both versions of the story also bring Bond to within a hair's breadth away from leaving Her Majesty's Secret Service and the life full of murder and mayhem, raising the interesting question regarding all of the evil plots he would go on to foil and if they might have succeeded against a less talented opponent. So, the most obvious stuff first. Like most Bond films, the adaptation completely ignores the time period of the book, moving the events from the 1950s to the contemporary 2000s. And of course, the gratuitous product placement that slowly but surely became like 80% of the on-screen footage of every single Bond film didn't come from the book. Casino Royale is a surprisingly short story, a mere 213 pages, so pretty much by necessity a lot of plot was added to the film. I'm actually pretty impressed with how they chose to go about this bolstering of the runtime. The novel began at the Casino Royale, with only a quick flashback to M going over the case to catch the reader up on the situation. Le Chiffre had lost the money he was entrusted with, making unauthorized financial investments in French brothels that he could personally frequent, right before the country passed anti-sex work laws and decimated the business. Basically, he was in danger of being assassinated because he was just too darn horny. The film gives their naughty boy a much more devious and less sexual get-rich-quick scheme, as Le Chiffre invests stocks betting against an airline that was about to reveal a new kick-ass prototype aeroplane, then pays a terrorist to destroy it, violently manipulating the stock market in his favor. Bond spends the first half of the movie figuring out this scheme by chasing down, stabbing, following, or sleeping with people involved, so he can successfully prevent the bombing. By doing this, the film not only got extra plot to work with, they made Bond personally responsible for the situation that Le Chiffre was attempting to gamble his way out of, tying the whole thing together. In a change that can be considered significant even if it didn't technically affect the plot over much, the film replaces the ominous, powerful organization that Le Chiffre worked for and eventually lost his life to. Mostly unnamed in this movie, only strongly hinted at, the sequels reveal the group to be Spectre, an international crime syndicate with massive reach and power. They didn't directly control Le Chiffre, but they made the introduction between him and some Ugandan rebels who wanted to invest and increase their funding, so they lost an unacceptable amount of face when he squandered it. Le Chiffre originally worked directly for SMERSH, a Soviet-Russian espionage agency I mistakenly called fictional in my Goldfinger review. I'm given to understand the name roughly translates to Death to Spies! Removing or replacing SMERSH was a consistent move for every single Bond adaptation. Fans of only the films would have no idea that the majority of Bond novels are super focused on being Cold War stories. Almost every famous Bond villain, known for being, and often parodied as, independent crime lords with plans to gain riches or take over the world in some way or other, were SMERSH agents or at least backed by the Russian government in some capacity. Spectre only features in the last 3 Bond novels, replacing SMERSH as the recurring villain due to the shifting geopolitical politics of the 1960s, which is also presumably why they were never incorporated into any films. Le Chiffre is a tad skinnier in the film. His book counterpart was estimated to weigh about 250 pounds, and Fleming liked to occasionally remind the reader that he was a husky gentleman in, I'm not gonna lie, kind of weird ways. You see, my dear boy, everything has been thought of, and you need have no fears on my account, he chuckled fatly. He also wore an eye patch with no straps on it like a monocle, a look even Mickelson might have struggled to make genuinely intimidating to a modern audience, so they had him weeping blood tears instead. It's harder to know exactly what Bond thinks of Vesper in the film before their romance starts, as we lack the internal monologue of the book. And I'm just gonna say it, that is an extremely good thing. And then there was this pest of a girl. He sighed. Women were for recreation. On a job they got in the way and fogged things up with sex and hurt feelings and all the emotional baggage they carried around. One had to look out for them and take care of them. Bitch, said Bond. And then, remembering the Monsieur, he said bitch again more loudly and walked out of the room. Don't worry though, his anger towards her quickly turns into anger and sexual attraction. He gazed for a moment into the mirror and wondered about Vesper's morals. He wanted her cold and arrogant body. He wanted to see tears and desire in her remote blue eyes, and take the ropes of her black hair in his hands and bend her long body back under his. Bond's eyes narrowed and his face in the mirror looked back at him with hunger. And now he knew that she was profoundly, excitingly sensual, but that the conquest of her body, because of the essential privacy in her, would each time have the sweet tang of rape. I won't performatively pretend like I believe that that was intended to be literal, but the sweet tang of rape is still a hell of a disturbing thing to read without warning. Fortunately, when we got to the inevitable sex scene, it appears to have been consensual, just really awkwardly written. My darling, he said. He plunged his mouth down onto hers, forcing her teeth apart with his tongue. He slipped his hands down her swelling buttocks and gripped them fiercely, pressing the centers of their body together. Parting, she slipped her mouth away from his and they clung together while he rubbed his cheek against hers and felt her hard breasts pressing against him. In both versions, Bond's feelings for Vesper really flourished as he was recovering from torture, but in the film there's clear signs of intimacy and affection between them before that, as he comforts her through the trauma of seeing people killed in front of her for the first time. It is safe to say that book book, Bond did not feel the same way, as we learn when he decides he would be perfectly happy sacrificing her so he can keep the money, or letting her get caught in the crossfire as he makes his half-hearted rescue attempt. As he drove, ripping the car faster and faster through the night, with the other half of his mind he cursed Vesper and M for having sent her on the job. This was just what he'd been afraid of, these blithering women who thought they could do a man's work. Why the hell couldn't they stay at home and mind their pots and pans and stick to their frocks and gossip and leave men's work to the men? And now for this to happen to him just when the job had come off so beautifully. For Vesper to fall for the old trick like that and get herself snatched and probably held to ransom like some bloody heroine in a strip cartoon. The silly bitch. Bond boiled at the thought of the fix he was in. Of course, the idea was a straight swap, the girl against his check for 40 million. Well, he wouldn't pay. He wouldn't think of paying. She was in the service and she knew what she was up against. He wouldn't even ask M. The job was more important than her. It was just too bad. She was a fine girl, but he wasn't going to fall for this childish trick. No dice! He would try to catch the Citron and shoot it out with them, and if she got shot in the process, that was too bad too. He would have done his stuff, tried to rescue her before they got off to some hideout, but if he couldn't catch up with them, then he would get back to his hotel and go to sleep and say no more about it. Our hero, ladies and gentlemen, it's damn lucky that Bookless Sheaf chose to run him off the road using good old-fashioned caltrops instead of putting Vesper in his path, because the original version of him absolutely would have run over her without hesitation. I am honestly not super sorry he got his pork sword smashed into oblivion. He kind of had it coming. To be fair, Bond's crassness wasn't exclusively directed at Vesper. He had deeply unfortunate thoughts regarding all manner of things, including, but not limited to, Miss Moneypenny would have been desirable but for her eyes, which were cool and direct and quizzical. Bond's experience told him that few of the Asiatic races were courageous gamblers, even the much vaunted Chinese being inclined to lose heart if the going was bad. He had something of Lenny in Of Mice and Men, but his inhumanity would come not from infernalism but from drugs. Marijuana, decided Bond. Bond refused to see Vesper for the first week or so of his recovery in the book because he was worried his willy had been permanently damaged and would fail to rise to the occasion, leaving her to worry about him and wonder what she had done to deserve such a cold shoulder. Le Chiffre's attempt to poison Bond, which was foiled by MI6 remote analysts and a well-timed defibrillator shock from Vesper, replaced a rather less dramatic henchman with a hidden gun to his back, which 007 bravely foiled by falling over backwards and knocking it away. One of the modernizations that I wanted to point out in particular was what information Le Chiffre was trying to extract from Bond with his horrendous assault on his thirsty ferret. In the film it was a PIN code that would release the online transfer of the funds. In the book it was a simple paper check that he had hidden somewhere in his hotel room. Le Chiffre's goons had failed to find it, so their boss had to try to get the location out of Bond himself. After rescue, Bond revealed it was technically just outside his hotel room, as he'd snuck out while no one was around and hid it behind the brass plate with the room number on it, which is actually pretty smart. I'm basically repeating word for word what I said in my Stardust Lost in Adaptation, but the film's climax is different from the book because it has one. After Mr. Digit is shot in the head and Bond's tonka is healed up, he and Vesper go away to a little cottage hotel and try to have a good time. Despite the sheer amount of vitriol he'd shown towards Vesper thus far, Book Bond was moments away from proposing to her before she started acting all paranoid and miserable. A few days later she took an overdose of sleeping pills and explained in her suicide note that her boyfriend had been held prisoner by Smerch for years, forcing her to be a double agent. It's kind of wild to me that the last third of the first ever Bond book was basically a mini romance novel, and not an especially compelling one at that. The writers of the film presumably read this and made a collective "fuck that, let's blow up a building" decision. Now Vesper's death takes place in a rapidly sinking house in Venice, surrounded by epic gun and fist fights with Spectre operatives. Her inability to live with her guilt anymore took the form of sealing herself inside a falling elevator shaft and drowning right in front of her new lover, leaving M to fill Bond in on the deets of her betrayal. This Vesper gets one extra moment of redemption as well when she posthumously leads Bond to the true mastermind of the film's plot. Book Vesper was a bit of a victim of the times and Fleming's questionable writing of women, so I'm happy her successor was allowed to get several quips in over Bond and save his dang life when he did a stupid. There's not a ton to talk about here, as they added way more to the plot than they subtracted. At first glance, the main thing I see lacking in the film is cigarettes. Tons and tons of cigarettes. It was the 50s, baby. Bond and pretty much every other character smoked continuously throughout the entire story. On a stressful day, he could easily inhale 70 of the bloody things by mid-evening. Lost in the many additions to the plot was a street bombing, which was intended to take out both Bond and, in a double cross, the assassins themselves at the same time, but it was bungled and the survivors were captured by the authorities. The Smash assassin, who put a bullet in Le Chiffre's brain, wasn't ordered to kill Bond because Smash didn't fully understand his involvement when they dispatched him, but he took it upon himself to carve Smash's initials into the back of Bond's hand in Russian letters so he would be easily recognizable as a spy in the future. This proved pointless though, as M insisted he get his skin graft to cover it. Thoughts? Final thoughts. Sandwiched twixt a longer beginning and a much more violent ending is a pretty decent retelling of the parts of Casino Royale that took place in, or at least near, the Casino Royale. They included all of the key plot beats and, dropping the slightly campy overtones that had become a staple of the Bond movies that came before, to embrace the grittier tone that was fashionable in the 2000s, proved to be very beneficial when it came to book loyalty. The biggest difference is 007 himself. While James Blonde wasn't above using seduction to get what he wanted, and sometimes behaved like a bit of a brat, he is still infinitely more palatable than the raving misogynist of the novel, and I mean that quite literally. He raves and rants about his hatred of women constantly. For the record though, I don't think Bond being an utter dickhead was unintentional. I suspect Fleming wanted to write a deeply flawed, hot mess of a character, and a hot mess in the 1950s apparently equals a women-hating chain smoker with anger issues. I don't have to like it though. As I said at the start, these books really don't do it for me for multiple reasons, but if you want to try them, or if you have and you like them, then meh, I'm not gonna argue with you, I am just gonna go and read something else. This film is pretty damn good though, I think outgrowing and outshining its source material in almost every way. It's a damn shame that these sequels, which were all original screenplays, not adaptations, were so hit and miss, and when they missed hard, but they're still pretty harmless, so no judgment if you like them. Thank you for joining me, my beautiful watchers. If you yearn for more Dom, there's extra episodes of Lost in Adaptation and other content on my Patreon page. Don't forget that the YouTube algorithm is a ravenous beast that devours any channels that fail to get enough likes and comments, and do take care of yourselves out there.
When the chips are down and you fear you're losing the plot, you hang from the end of your rope like a pendulous knot. And you feel that the seat has been cut out from under your ass. There's a man you can meet who will happily give you a scratch. Ball scratcher!
Much love and appreciation to my patrons of honor, Shelby Holtz, April Mack, and Curtis Charles Jr. Shout out to Ilnej for the credits music, check out his channel for more parody and original songs, and a huge thank you to this video's editor, Sophia Ricciardi. Links to her work in the video description. Also, fun fact, it's really hard to buy hair gel in New Zealand. I had to go all the way to the top of a mall to find this barber. Nope, yeah, but. Born into wealth in 1908, as a young man he went to Eton. An Englishman always has more tea, even when he hates it.